everybody, and I'm here to talk about my most anticipated releases for the first 4 months of 2026. So we are about to go into the month of December, and so while I'm very much ready to dive into the month of December, the Christmas atmosphere and all those things, and just like embrace my favorite months, part of me is also already looking ahead, and so I want to get this out of the way for a second so that I can then just fully indulge into the month of December and try to stretch it as long as possible. But so yeah, let's go into my anticipated releases for the first third of 2026. I'm going to go by month and I'm going to go by sort of like genre. Mostly it will just be fantasy and literary fiction, and this will just be books that I have my eye out for. I'm not fully convinced about all of them yet neither. It's not like I'm fully sure that I'll get around to all of these. If past experience is accurate, then I'll definitely not get around to all of these. But some of these are pre-orders and some of these I do have access to through my Storytel audiobook app, so those I will have marked specifically over on this video as well, so that you can kind of have a look at what I'm most likely to pick up out of these already. And I maybe will give some of my reservations about some of these as well. I'll give a very short synopsis for the books that are that I'm about to introduce, and yeah, you can take it from there. This is hopefully going to point you in the direction of some books that you might want to keep an eye out for. So in the month of January, I have a few months that I'm really looking forward to. I'll go through these by genre, so we'll go into the fantasy books first. So on the 13th of January, Graceless Heart by Isabel Ibanez is releasing. This is a book set in 13th century Florence or Firenze, and we are looking at a world that has immortals in it. It has forbidden magic, and our protagonist is a girl who is basically able to use this forbidden magic, a talent which she exposes during a sort of competition in order to be able to save her brother's life. Now she gets embroiled into this bigger world conflict as a consequence of that. There is apparently some sort of a romance with one of the people from this immortal family, and there's also what appears to be sort of like a religious war going on in the background as well. I have some reservations about this one. I'm not entirely sure that I'm going to be reading it. Like, first of all, it's set in the city of Volterra. Like, the beginning is set in the city of Volterra in Italy, and I cannot think of that and not associate that with Twilight. And then the fact that we are looking at this competition with an immortal family within this city just gives me even more sort of like Twilight warning signs, being like, this is based off of Twilight. And while I was a Twilight girl back in the day, that is a huge red flag for me nowadays. However, I'm willing to look past it if I were to hear very good things about it. My main reservation is that I fear that, like Twilight, it is going to be quite romance heavy, and from the synopsis, there are things about it that really speak to me, like this sort of idea of it being 13th century Italy, right? So no, 15th century Italy, so old Italy setting, Firenze, yes, love it. Forbidden magic, sure. Religious war, yeah, that is going to be potentially very frustrating, because religion definitely in that time period can be a very frustrating topic, but it has potential. Like, it can be frustrating, but that can be a good thing. However, this sort of like inkling in the synopsis about a romance, I hope for it to remain an inkling. I don't want it to take over the book. I have not read an Isabel Ibanez yet. I don't know whether she leans more romance heavy, but I'm just fearful of that. So I will be looking out for sort of like early reviews for this one before diving into it myself. Next we have The Poet Empress on the 20th of January by Shantao. This is a book that takes place in a fantastical version of China. Our protagonist is a girl who is basically in a desperate situation. I believe like her sister has just passed away, and I think most of her family is also dead, but I'm not entirely sure of that. She is so desperate that she decides to offer herself off as one of the concubines to the son of the current imperial ruler. However, he is known for his cruelty, and so she kind of needs to make her heart of stone and embroil herself in the cutthroat world of the imperial court. And it seems like she is doing a good job, that she's sort of like favored by this cruel prince. However, she's also kind of treading dangerous ground, because there's this sort of like poetry magic that has gone extinct that she is going to kind of secretly be trained in order to kind of keep her position. Now, Imperial China setting, buzzword, but the issue here is that it is, you know, potentially toxic romantic relationship, and the poet magic might also be an issue, because me and poetry, we don't mesh. But I'm probably gonna check this one out due to reasons that I cannot really go into. But yes, I will probably check this one out, and then I'll give you my thoughts about it. But it isn't one that I am 100% sold on because of those reasons. The final fantasy release in the month of January is on the 27th of January. We are getting To Ride a Rising Storm by Monocle Black Goose, the sequel to How to Shape a Dragon's Breath, the first book in the, I cannot remember the series name, it's like a name, Nanum Coated, something like that, series. This is a series in which we're following an indigenous main character who is being granted access to a prestigious academy. However, she is like the first indigenous student that they have over there, which I think the first, which results in quite some racism and a lot of sort of like highbrow behavior from the people around them. A lot of people trying to impose their views on how somebody should act, how somebody should behave, how somebody should look upon her. So there's a lot of fraught relationships within this book, not just between her and her fellow students, but also between the staff at the academy and her. However, this is a dragon riding school, so dragon riding will also take place within this story. This very much felt sort of like a Victorian type of novel, but with a very different twist, because it features characters that you would never see in a Victorian novel, and of course it also features fantasy, but it definitely had that feel of that type of world. I wasn't fully like engaged with it. I definitely felt like it was a little bit more sort of like slice of life than what I had imagined from it, but I definitely do want to continue on with the story, give it more of a chance, knowing that it is more slice of life. Going into the sequel will also hopefully just increase my enjoyment of it. I definitely had a good time with the first one, but I think like the way that you go into a book, your expectations, that can definitely shape your reading experience. And so when you're expecting more of an epic fantasy, then your experience is going to be a little bit different when it turns out not to be that. Moving into literary fiction. So for literary fiction, the first one is another 13th of January release, which is The Last of Earth by Deepa Annapera. This is a book set in 19th century Tibet. Tibet at that point in time is sealed off for the British because of the expansion of the British Empire. Not entirely sure whether it's just the British or all of Westerners, but in any case, we're looking at two protagonists. On the one hand, we're following an Indian guy who's basically been trained by the Brits to infiltrate Tibet and spy on their behalf. He is accompanying an explorer who wants to map out the entire like a river within Tibet. And then they stumble upon the path of a Westerner in disguise, a 50-year-old woman who has been refused entry to the Geographical Society in London and who is determined to be the first Westerner to reach Lhasa, the capital of Tibet. On the 20th, we get How to Commit a Post-Colonial Murder by Nina Swarmidos McConaughey. So this is a book set in the US. We are looking at an Indian-American family, and I won't go through the full synopsis because I didn't read it, because all I needed to know was the following. The uncle has just died and his young nieces admit to having killed him. However, they're not to blame, the British are to blame. So did not need to know more. Very excited to go into that one. And then the final book that I have on my list for the month of January is on the 27th. We are getting A Beast Slinks Towards Beijing by Alice Evelyn Young. This is a book about a protagonist who is estranged from her father, and one day her father shows up on her doorstep and starts telling her his life story. This is magical realist, and we are basically going to get his story of his life under a lot of changes in the Chinese in a time that sees a lot of changes within China. So we start off with Japanese occupied Manchuria, and we move through the Cultural Revolution to present day. And in the background there's this sort of like prophecy that has basically guided his life and will guide his daughter's life from this moment onwards. So yes, those are the January releases that I'm mainly looking forward to. Hopefully this has given you some inspiration for some books to pick up yourself in the month of January. Moving into the month of February. So in the month of February I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 books to talk about, and so let's get cracking on figuring out what these books are like. Alright, so let's go for it. I think I have less clear of a mix for this month between sort of like the fantastical and the non-fantastical, and some things that I feel will probably like lean more literary are still to some extent magical. So I think for this month I'm going to go chronological rather than divide between two sort of like genre interests of mine. So on the 3rd of February we start off with Agnes Aubert's Mystical Cat Shelter by Heather Fawcett. So Heather Fawcett is the author of the Emily Wilde's Encyclopedia to Fairies. She is coming back with a second chance romance featuring a cat shelter. I don't know whether this book is going to be mystical, magical, or whatever, or just going to be a romance, because the plot does not necessarily clarify that. So we have a woman who has lost her husband 2 years ago. She's basically hanging on by a thread. She has created this cat rescue. However, the cat rescue is kind of struggling and she has to relocate to a new location. However, when she moves, she quickly realizes that the store that she has purchased is actually a little bit of a front for an underground organization that is led by a notorious guy. I don't know whether that means like whether he's considered a criminal or not, but so they basically kind of she's kind of drawn to him. It's very much enemies to lovers. I wrote down that it's second chance lover, but I'm not entirely sure why it would be second chance. I don't think she knew him before, so maybe that was just a wrong interpretation of my brain at the time. But so basically enemies to lovers featuring rescue cat center, and so I'm looking forward to this one. I have never really been drawn to Emily Wilde. However, I've heard really good things over the years, and so maybe I will give it a go, but I'll give it a go once I've read this one and if I've enjoyed this one. Next up on the 5th we have Greedy by Kelly Kazumi, which is a book that deals with a debt to the Yakuza and a chef who is being recruited by this billionaire woman whose hunger is insatiable. So I am kind of looking forward to this. I don't think that this is a Japanese author. I think this is probably a Japanese-American author, but I'm not sure about that, so feel free to contradict me. It's just the first name that makes me think this. And the concept definitely intrigues me because I love a book about food. I love exploring the love for food and starting to feel the hunger after reading a great description about food in books, and so I'm definitely drawn to that side of things. I'm curious about the insatiable hunger type of aspect into the description of this book. Does this kind of hint towards a sort of like vampirical essence, or is this just about the greed of the owner and about, you know, our consumer society? I don't know for sure, but I'm definitely looking forward to giving this one a go. Though I will say, like as with all of these, there are too many on this list, and so there will be some casualties that disappear throughout the year because there's just too little time to get to all of the books that I have an interest in. Next up on that same day we have Salt Swept by Catalina Watt, which is a adventure fantasy story, swashbuckling adventure, because it deals with a pirate crew. So this is a pirate crew that is comprised of a multitude of characters. It seems like we'll get sort of like 4, maybe even 5 perspectives. So they all have their different sort of backgrounds, and I didn't necessarily take too many notes about the different backgrounds that we'll be meeting up with. But so it's a hagtag crew that is going to go on a perilous mission together because they're basically trying to reach the center of a maelstrom that nobody has ever like come back out of. But they're doing this to find the treasure within, but also because magic is dying, and basically this is going to be the solution to that. The veil between the living and the dead has never been thinner, and the current monarch on the throne seems to be somebody with an insatiable hunger. So So I don't know what all of those elements within that premise comprise of, but I'm actually really excited about getting to this one. Next up, we have on the 10th of February, She Made Herself a Monster by Anna Kovacheva. This is a book that I think might lean a little bit more literary, but that's just based off of that cover, because that cover uses a artwork by Artemisia Gentileschi, which is the reason why I was drawn into this book, because I saw that cover and I was like, I need to know what this one is about. This is a book drawing on Slavic folklore to give us a con artist posing as a vampire slayer who meets this young girl in a little bit of a desperate situation that she is going to try and help out, but the plan goes awry. So I was immediately drawn into this book because of the cover art, okay? So I need a cover that has this design on it, because this is a painting by Artemisia Gentileschi. It is the painting of them decapitating the head off of some guy. I remember, I knew the full story behind it, but I've kind of forgotten which one it is. Is this the Judith? I think so, right? But so basically the vibe that is already giving me is like women taking on the patriarchy. Give it to me. But so the full plot line for this is that we have this woman who is a con artist. She basically travels from village to village, and she, in I think it was 17th century Bulgaria, she kind of stages during the night a horrifying scene, and then she puts the fear of then she puts the fear into the local people, telling them that this was a vampire and that she is a vampire slayer who is there to help them out, and then she supposedly destroys this vampire and earning money off of it, I guess, and moving on to the next town. However, along the way she meets this young girl in this city that is plagued by mysterious illness. Everybody thinks that she is responsible for the illness, and in order to probably like counteract her influence, they are about to force her into a marriage. And so these two women come up with this plot to try and create a massive monster that will somehow lead to her being able to escape this fate. However, their plan kind of takes on a life of their own. So I'm really excited about this one. The more I hear this premise again, I'm like, yeah, this one needs to be in it. So I have also pre-ordered this one. Next up we have on the 12th, Good People by Batmina Sabitz. So this is a literary read, or like a general fiction, so this is not on the fantasy side, and this is a book in which we're looking at a family who escaped Afghanistan at some point in time. They've moved to the US, and they are basically like they were just getting by there, but over the decades they have basically amassed this massive fortune, so now it's like a really well settled family. However, the youngest daughter, I think, in the family dies. Her car swerves off of the road and she passes away. And so she was kind of the apple of her father's eye, but upon her death, multiple versions of her life story start to surface. Everybody seems to have a different interpretation of who she was and whether she was a good girl or a bad girl. So this will deal with Islamophobia, misogyny, the different views on women and on what a woman should be like, what a woman should act like. And so I'm looking forward to that because it sounds very interesting, because I'm assuming we're just going to get the entire story through different perspectives on what actually happened, and that sounds very interesting to me. And then on the 17th we have The Astral Library by Kate Quinn. This is a book about traveling through literature into alternate lives. So this is a book about a girl who was part of the foster child system. She is now out of that situation, I think, and she is just like working multiple jobs to try and earn a living, hoping that one day she might actually be able to go to university, but thinking that that is probably not very realistic. So most of her time she spends in the Boston Public Library, escaping through fantasy stories that she is reading over there non-stop. However, one day she stumbles upon a section of the library she'd never been in, and the the mysterious librarian there tells her that this is a part of the library where you can travel into the fictional worlds of literature. She's only just discovered this when there's an enemy on her tails, and so she makes her way through these different worlds, ranging from the novels of Jane Austen through Sherlock Holmes and The Great Gatsby, some of the titles that are referred to within the synopsis, in an attempt to escape this enemy. And it's quite vague about this enemy, but she also doesn't really seem to know much about the enemy herself. She doesn't really seem to be aware of whether it is the library that is under threat or whether she herself is under threat. But yeah, sounds great. Kate Quinn is a name that I know. I don't really know what else she has written, but I definitely haven't read anything by her yet. But this synopsis makes me go like, yes, I love a good book about traveling through literature and seeing these different settings, and seeing like a modern woman in these different settings. Just sounds amazing to me. On the 24th, we have The Red Winter by Cameron Sullivan. This is a queer fantasy that is a reimagining of French history leading up to the French Revolution. So this is going to be a story of a guy who is basically a monster hunter. He is returning 20 years, I think, into the future. Like, he's returning. The sentence structure does not make any sense. He will be returning to a town that he has helped 20 years ago, because there's this monster, it's called the Monster of Godevrin, I think. Could be completely wrong about that. And I do think that this is something that is like pictured in some sort of like ancient art form. But so it's considered to be the first werewolf, basically. And so 20 years ago, he already like tried to destroy this monster and like was witness to all of the carnage that it's imparted into this small town, and now he's being asked back to have another go at it by a guy that he had a little bit of a queer romance with. I assume it says something like that they had like a dark secret, but because this book is marked as queer, I'm assuming that their romance was what the secret was, and so he's basically asked back to tackle this problem again. He is basically in a sort of like contract with a demon. I'm unsure whether the demon is just living inside him or whether I should interpret that differently. But in any case, the world has changed in 20 years, and so his activity nowadays is met with a lot of resilience and is met with a lot of resistance and a lot of skepticism, and it is definitely calling the attention of the Inquisition. And the world is also on the blink of revolution. So the French Revolution is just around the corner. So reimagining of French history, and yeah, that sounds really great. So I've also pre-ordered it. And then the final book for the month of March is on the 26th. We get Cleopatra by Sara El-Arifi. It is marked as magical realism, but you know, magical realism is sort of like a very difficult tag to interpret, because magical realism is interpreted in so many different ways, so I'm not entirely sure how magical this is. Sara El-Arifi is known for having written 2 fantasy series before this, so it's definitely possible that there is going to be a magical aspect to this book. But so this is a reimagining of the life of Cleopatra from her perspective. So a look at the final pharaoh of the Egyptian Empire as she is under threat from the Roman Empire, and the Roman Empire has its internal power struggles. Meanwhile, she is dealing with love quarrels, I don't know, because with Cleopatra we have sort of like the speculations about her relationships with Caesar and with Antony, so like Mark Antony after Caesar, right? So yeah, we'll see what this book is once we've actually read it, but I have really enjoyed the first series by Sara El-Arifi. The second series just was not as much to my liking, so I only tried the first one, but it was too romance heavy for me. So I'm hoping that this reimagining of Cleopatra's life is going to look more at the tactical aspect of Cleopatra's life and is going to be less focused on the romance side of things. But so yes, this is it for the releases for the month of February. Let me know which ones you are most interested in on your end, and see you guys for a future video.